Thank you, Walter. Your Spanish is improving. Huh? Okay, thank you for being here, as Walter said, in this fall day, in the time of midterms, and I am very happy to see you here. Okay, I am going to work on the concept of intimacy in mainly one text of Luisa Valenzuela, and I prepared some handouts that I think you have there in your hands. I am old-fashioned, so I don't use the PowerPoint, and I don't advise my students to use the PowerPoint. And I am going to approach to this author, who I know pretty well, her work and personally, and with a kind of personal and literary critic approach. So let's start now with the paper is divided in 4 sections, and I hope we have time for your intervention that I appreciate very much. I am not going to talk about black novel with Argentines, but some of you have read it, so we can interact after that. I start the first section that is has a subtitle, Intimacy, Sexuality, Body and Gender, with a quotation by Freud from The Sexual Life of Human Beings in his introductory lectures in psychoanalysis that you have there, and says, sucking at the mother's breast is the starting point of the whole sexual life, the unmatched prototype of every later sexual satisfaction to which fantasy often enough recurs in times of need. There is a very well-known fable from the philosopher Schopenhauer, which Freud liked to cite, about the dilemma of closeness between porcupines who must huddle together to keep warm in the winter, but soon spread apart to prevent the pain of being poked by each other's quills. The desire for intimacy is a fundamental human need. The earliest form of intimacy takes place between mother and child after birth through the form of touching, sucking, holding, and laughter. And here I have another quote that is there. The child's main interest is, as you know, directed to the intake of nourishment when children fell asleep after being sated at the breast. They show an expression of blissful satisfaction which will be repeated later in life after the experience of sexual orgasm. The initial bonding between the child and a good enough mother, that is the expression of Winnicott, one of the followers of Freud, who put together also some ideas of Melanie Klein. The initial bonding between the child and a good enough mother, characterized according to Winnicott by sufficient empathic attunement, establishes the foundation for subsequent emotional development and the capacity for intimacy. The desire for intimacy, then, has its origin in this developmental phase and can be understood as a wish to return to this early bonding mother-child in order to undo the primordial separation from the other. From then on, there will always be a conflict between dependence and independence as the individual moves from the initial symbiosis, oneness, and fusion fantasy and the pre-Oedipal phase to separation in Oedipal 1, in which the father facilitates child separation from the mother. Winnicott states that the combination of an initial healthy symbiotic phase and a successful separation individuation process provides the individual the formation of a separate self, an identity that, together with the capacity to be alone, are fundamental requisites for intimacy. Intimacy is not possible without merger, but for those individuals who have never adequately separated from the symbiotic relation with the mother, intimacy is extremely threatening and represents a psychic danger. Danger of engulfment, fear of being stifled, suffocated, possessed, imprisoned, swallowed up, or absorbed by the other. Similarly, for those who have never achieved a proper passage through the separation individuation process, there is also an intense sense of loss and fear of abandonment or rejection. In general, all intimate relationships bring together the twin fears of engulfment and abandonment. In addition, and because perfect empathic attunement is impossible, frustration and rage at the intimate other is inevitable. The defense against the rage and hatred is most of the time obtained by splitting the world into idealized and persecutory figures, all good versus all bad. Relationships based upon this strict division are very fragile because they don't tolerate disappointments and impede the formation of an intimate relationship. Intimacy requires an accurate and realistic perception of the other and the capacity to tolerate ambivalence and conflict. Well, after that introduction, we go to the text. Second session of the text, fiction and autofiction. And I start with a line from Valenzuela, where she says, this text will be essentially about the apprenticeship of love. The Dark Desires and the Others, New York Notebooks, was published in 2002. It is written as a diary and could be included under the category of autofiction, coined in the 1970s by Serge Dubrovsky, a French author, literary critic, a specialist in 19th century French theater, who taught for a long time in New York University. And he coined the term autofiction. That is what he does in his own creative writing, no? But he's also a literary critic. Valenzuela's diaries open with two epigraphs from Marguerite Duras, one from Marguerite Duras, Les Amants, in French, the lover, that says, l'histoire de ma vie n'existe pas, ça n'existe pas, il n'y a pas de centre, pas de chemin, pas de ligne. English translation, the history of my life does not exist at all. There is never any center to it, no path, no line. The second epigraph is from Spencer Holst. It goes like this, quote, so she wrote more stories, and for each story she went out and had an experience. And all kind of things happened to her, for she picked her men carefully for their literary value, end of quote. I consider that these two epigraphs are fundamental to understand Valenzuela's text. A narration about her own life in which reality and fiction are strongly intertwined and where life is mainly at the service of fiction. A fragmented, reiterative, obsessive, and digressive narrative in which time, present and past, and places, New York, Buenos Aires, are constantly interchanged, and through which she is constantly searching for her own identity as an Argentine, as a writer, and mainly as a woman in love, according to the quote with which one I open this section. I repeat, this text will be essentially about the apprenticeship of love. The diary becomes a repository of her many emotional and sexual adventures, a refuge and a mirror, but also the cause of a recurrent guilt because of her inability to be doing cosas serias, serious things. That is, writing novels, short stories, essays, and or participating in the intellectual and cultural New York scene. Instead, she is enumerating long lists of successive recurrent lovers while reflecting about sexuality, men, and the relationship between the sexes. This determines long entries in the diary in which she appears ecstatic, frantic, sensual, wounded, deserted, invaded, polemical, competitive, defeated. As a result of all of these, we as readers have access to Valenzuela's self-portrait that oscillates between a belle dame sans pitié, a beautiful lady without compassion, and without or with a whip, and a victim of her own others' desires. A woman alone most of the time and locked inside of herself in a sort of masturbatory act that she equates with the creative one. For that reason, in the diaries, she celebrates Terry Rubin's confession about masturbation while criticizing at the same time his naivete. She writes, in his book, Do It, Jerry Rubin breaks off at one point and says he's going to go to masturbate for a while and then come back. And I like that, confessing an unconfessable act and with total disinterest, as if we, weren't already been committing the masturbatory act of writing our confessions. End of quote. That Desires and the Others is like a sewing box, as Virginia Woolf wanted her diary to be, full of different things. It includes seminal themes, ideas, fragments of future text, the narration of her own dreams, reflections about literature, criticism, and creativity. As readers, we have the impression of the déjà vu, because most of Valenzuela's recurrent topics, what she called her big obsessions, reappear here. For example, the search for both Argentine and personal identity, the need of masks and disguises in our interrelation with others, the fear of the omnipresent censor and self-censorship that can only be diffused by the use of humor and eroticism. There are two quotes that you have there. She says, "This wandering through the rough and pathless territories of the soul and my passion for masks, one and the same thing. Masks hide the face, only seemingly leaving leaving the person intact and untouched behind them because the mask transforms you. And the other quote, carefully choosing the outfit for a certain occasion is like putting on a mask. You assume another identity. Acting as a constant witness of herself and the others, like a mirror, Valenzuela recovered her childhood and memories of her mother. The writer Luisa Mercedes Levinson, during the day writing in bed, surrounded by papers, notebooks, and cats, and coming alive at night in her so-called Bloomsbury group in Buenos Aires. In this recollection, her mother appears usually cold and distant towards a daughter who used to admire her very much. There are two similar statements of the relationship mother-daughter. One in Valenzuela's preface to her mother's short stories, translated into English in 1984. A second one in these diaries. Let's read the first one. I have a recurrent image of my mother, Lisa in bed, only surrounded by papers, the lettera 22, it was the Italian typewriter, manual typewriter of the time, the lettera 22 over her stomach, typing with 2 fingers, which was strange for someone who performed hard concerts in her youth and played the piano by ear. There she was, surfing along those papers by hand and by type, pages and pages of manuscripts, many now lost, trampled and destroyed by her cats. And the second one. My mother submerged in her own sea of papers in bed and writing, like me now, only that I am not in bed. I am getting in and out of bed, not in a nightgown, but dressed, getting in and out, incapable of staying in one place, always opting for the other, the further away. End of quote. In her diaries, Valenzuela shows less pity for her mother and more regret for her misplaced admiration and love for her, feelings that she considered should have been directed to her own daughter instead of to her mother. In one of her frequent puns, Valenzuela played with the words mother and mother country, madre, madre patria, both equally lacking in affection and full of rejection. Forceful pushing her to ramble around the world looking for a home that finally finds in her own writing. And she says, to leave the mother behind, my one absolute necessity. It is not a coincidence that Valenzuela came back to live in Argentina after her mother's death. In Dark Desires in the Other, that as I said has a subtitle, New York Notebooks, Valenzuela's life in New York is the primary material to this text. Although she prefers to leave her protagonist unnamed, she explicitly identifies herself with the narrative persona through frequent references to real people, Susan Sontag, Erika Young, Joseph Brodsky, Alicia Duhovne-Ortiz, Cortázar, and to places and real facts in her life. Her own work at the university, her commitments in committees, the Guggenheim Award that she gets when she is in New York. On the other hand, she fictionalizes her lovers, whose names she never discloses, but whom she voraciously devours and consumes by integrating them into her fiction. We have to remember here the quotation by Holst. In a fragmented and discontinued narrative, the quotation by Marguerite Duras. And through language, Valenzuela transforms the banalities of daily life into a literary work. The third section is intimacy, sexuality, and autobiographical writing. And there is a line from the diary, I am the one who could never speak the word love. I am following the quotation that I think you have over there, no? In some kind of order, I hope. I am the one who could never speak the word love. In On the Dynamics of Interpersonal Isolation by Joseph Barner, a psychoanalyst, I find a useful statement to consider how intimacy, sexuality, body, and gender are depicted in Valenzuela's texts. Barnes writes, quote, the basic requirement for intimacy is that its participants be known to each other. In turn, this requires both the wish to know, i.e. the interest, effort, and concern, and the decision to be known, i.e. to allow exposure of self to the other. And he adds, we can extend this basic requirement to all stages in the development of intimacy from infancy on. In the previous section, I referred to Valenzuela's relationship to her mother, whom she perceived as cold, self-centered, and constantly rejecting her, to the point that she needed to leave the country in order to be herself and establish her own identity as a person and as a writer. Valenzuela's confessed admiration and almost idealization for her mother don't look like love or understanding of the other. Furthermore, Valenzuela's obsession for collecting masks and her constant need for using them constitute an avoidance of self-exposure, a strategy of self-protection, isolation, and recurrent escape away from the others. And I have here a quote from the diary, you have it there. Space is what it's all about, no doubt there. It is about space. The space that belongs to me and that they all want to occupy for me. And I struggle to keep it, and every time that I say, here I am, in a little while, I find out it is true. There I am, but I am alone, nobody nearby, nothing. Because of the simple fear of contamination from those who see themselves as protected by their masks. I have learned, not without some pain, to tear the mask from others, but my own mask has become my flesh. End of quote. As we have seen, adult love is always a revival of all love, mainly of the relationship mother-child. Love is then inclined towards the familiar. In Valenzuela's case, the need to differentiate herself from her mother, as we have already said more than one time, first as a woman, second as a writer, and to defend herself from whom she experienced as a detached and unreachable one, by disguising her emotion and wishes through masks, marked her romantic relations and determined her romantic narrative. In the initial pages of the book, Valenzuela mentions an episode that is also a completion of Host's epigraph. This is the episode that she mentioned. It's there. Having recently arrived in New York, an analyst whom I saw sporadically cursed me with the following: "You don't look for men. You don't look for lovers. You look for character for your novels." And she continued saying, I stopped seeing the analyst after that session because I didn't think he could understand me, could understand that for me, life and literature, love and literature are the same. Now, though, I worry about it because I see myself in Spencer Hall's character, one of the two epigraphs that I mentioned at the beginning that for me are key to read and interpret the diaries. She said, I'm worried about it because I see myself in Spencer Hall's character, the one from his True Confessions story. It is true that I only quoted half of the paragraph, the part that fit best. The rest, she said, goes like this. For she picked her men carefully for their literary values, seeking always someone sinister for her unhappy romances. And after each, she would simply write what happened, the simple truth in a sorry style. End of quote. In this self-reflective fragment, we recognize some recurrent topics. One, the need to cover the truth, even from herself, while approaching to it only through writing and through quoting somebody else. Two, the confusion between fiction and life. Three, the manipulation of personal situations in order to write her fiction. Four, the omnipotence and desire for power and control. Five, her narcissistic detachment from life and human beings in All About Me. In a world centered on me, the presence of the other is considered an intrusion, a threat, or an eternal disappointment. In an interview with Linda Jablonski in the spring 1991 in New York, she was already back to Argentina, was living there, but she goes back and forth, Argentina and New York a lot. She has good friends there, etc. In an interview with Linda Jablonski in the spring 1991 in New York, Valenzuela is asked about her home life, and she answers that she lives alone in the middle of a park, surrounded by old trees. Asked about the men in her life, she says, I always quarreled with my men. I was often quite violent. And when the interviewer states, I can see anger on the page, Valenzuela continues, I don't like to be invaded. I feel invaded easily. I need my privacy more than anything else. In this same interview, there is another statement concerning vampirism. She says, when I write, I become a vampire. I suck cold blood from anything for a novel. And this has to do with the quotation of men in her life that is another way of coming back to one of the epigraphs of her diary, the one from Stephen Holmes. Along these diaries, we can see a recurrent pattern in her love relationship. There is always fear of rejection. One renounces love for fear of rejection. I claim to love and reject at the same time. And finally, I achieved what I wanted, to be rejected myself, and to feel proud, confirmed in my doubts. Also, each and every of her love affairs begins with the fantasy of merging with another and the illusion of being as one, while triggering pre-Oedipal conflict around separation from the mother, including engulfment and abandonment. We live to sink oneself in the other, to look for salvation in the eyes of the other, the lifesaver, and then what? Drag him to the shipwreck or drift away, floating through the cross currents. There is a recurrent motif present also in her novel, black novel with Argentines, that we can talk about that later if you want, that has to do with the hand, to take hands and to take the hand away. In an occasion when she is one of her lovers, whom she calls the cat, and that is evidently the person who is behind the character in Novela Negra con Argentinos, Agustín, no? She tells him, because of Puss in Boots, Gato con Botas, no? You are not 5 years old anymore. No need to think that when someone takes your hand, they are going to drag you off to some place you don't want to go. When someone takes your hand now, it is only to share a bit of human warmth. But immediately she contradicts herself. That is what I say, what I instruct, what I try to inculcate. But later I know it isn't true. I give my hand and I take it away. I too succumb to fear, although I like to proclaim the opposite. I have already said more than once, the first human experience of intimacy is in the relation between mother and child, characterized by symbiosis, oneness, communion, and fantasy of fusion. In this pre-linguistic phase, there is the experience of merging between mother and child, which, according to Winnicott, as we have already seen, the mother mirroring is the response to her baby. The language acquisition is accompanied by the process of separation that continues the rest of the person's life. This initial mother-child bonding has deep implications for the person's capacity for intimacy as an adult, because there is always mutual vulnerability and risk involved when people engage each other in each other's intimate relationship. Intimacy demands trust, confidence, sharing openness, and self-disclosure. Intimacy has two dimensions, intrapersonal and intrapsychic. The first one is person to person. The second one is inside of the person and steers all kinds of conflict, fear of fusion, fear of object loss, paranoia, and schizoid fears. The last section has a subtitle, Creativity as a Form of Redemption. And there I quote Joyce McDougall, who is a psychoanalyst, Canadian psychoanalyst, who died a couple of years ago. She has wrote a lot about creativity and psychoanalysis. She has done theater when she was younger at the university. And she has also wrote about theater and psychoanalysis and some analogy in the stage, in a play, and the analytic session. Anyway, I consider, and also feminist, and a good writer for this type of topics, no? So there are two quotes here. To create artistic or intellectual children, and she has worked with all kinds of artists and creative people in different fields, not only in the arts, no? Inventive people, etc. To create artistic or intellectual children, one must unconsciously assume the reproductive role of both parents, be both the fertile womb and the fertilizing penis. The creative act always runs the risk of being experienced unconsciously as a crime against the parents, the theft of their sexual organs and generative powers. As you see, this goes even further that I have mentioned in the relation with the mother, but it's also the father who is the one who separates the child from the mother, who could be the target of this ambivalence. No? The other quote is from Violence and Creativity. I have come to the notion that creative and innovative activity, among its many other aims, also serves unconsciously to heal the drive to destruction to oneself and or others, and thus overcome feelings of fragmentation and disorientation. Creative individuals, and there are some things that you have to add, it's a plural. Creative individuals, without being consciously aware of it, are often dealing with fragmented parts of themselves that urgently needs to find a sense of individuality and cohesion through their creative work of inventions. And I am almost ready to finish. At the beginning of Dark Desires, the diaries, Valenzuela writes, enough of so many cuts and breaks, enough of focusing on pieces of myself. This will be an attempt of integration, the internal and external enemies, and the intergames that connects them. Valenzuela has written a lot about anger and violence in her work. As we said, from the beginning she started writing in spite of her mother, a well-known writer herself, and the center of an important literary group that included Borges, Sabato, Machea, and other prominent male figures in the Argentinian literary landscape. She continued writing with a mixture of autobiographical and political material, looking for a feminine voice in order to explore and express her own body, sexuality, and eroticism, while dealing with self and external censorship. Along all her work, because this gives a wider frame of reference to this punctual presentation that is focused on her diaries, and one aspect of her diaries that is prominent, that is her sexual life and her approach to that. No? Along all her work, Valenzuela has been involved in politics and mostly in the power struggles, both in the public and the private sphere, focusing on the relations of the oppressor and the oppressed, those who govern and those who are governed, the social and the psychological, male and female. Short stories like Other Weapons, Cambio de Armas, that we have seen, novels like Black Novel with Argentine, or National Reality from the Bed, Realidad Nacional desde la Cama, when she came back to Argentina, has been the result of her fictionalization of reality and history. She has also approached politics in several essays that deal with feminism. For example, The Other Side of the Phallus, where she shared with Julia Kristeva and other French feminists the need to re-examine language and representation from a woman's point of view. Her inner psychological struggles with herself, her partner, her motherland, and mother language are never explicitly explored in her interviews or essays, but are fictionalized in her narrative, and as we have seen, extensively addressed in her diary, The Dark Desires and the Others, New York Notebook. Thank you very much. Well, now you work. I have done my work.
We have time for some questions or comments.
Yeah.
So, thinking about Valenzuela's work, the few works of hers that I've been able to read thus far, even before you started talking, I made a note on the quotes here about cambio de armas, specifically because of the use of torture as sort of a sadomasochist device, and then tying together the mother and the motherland, and being unable to distinguish between the two. And therefore using literature as a way of projecting these feelings that she's unable to deal with into a pseudo-fictional world.
How do you connect Cambio de Armas with the scenario that I presented in relation to her mother?
Specifically, with her mother and the distance and the cold, feelings between the two, the inability to fully break off the symbiosis, it would be akin to the government feeding on its people, in a sense, of the government's own vampirism, especially during the
authority, no?
Yes.
The authoritarian figure, no?
Right, or even as Suzanne Levine said in Puig's autobiography, the strange authority games that Puig's father used to play, and that all men were, at the time, sort of acting at home, on the job everywhere, projecting this sort of machismo. And so, therefore, with Valenzuela bringing her own voice, her own point of view back into it, breaking off with her mother, and using that uncanny fear and creativity as a means of dealing with it.
Yeah, I haven't thought, but you were right. I mean, in Cambio de Armas, we have seen that other weapons in the English translation. That I think is her best short story, no doubt about that. It's a real jewel, that text, that short story. For the rest that you haven't read it, is a prisoner, a woman who has, that is a real situation during the Dirty War. Those prisoners who came from the leftish, the guerrilla fighters that in the Southern Cone have a different meaning, but were cultivated university people fighting the military government. And this happened. The women were taking as prisoners. They were tortured and sometimes were selected by a military person to be their concubine, no? They're women. And in this case, I advise my students to watch Night Porter, because it's a similar situation, no? In a different setting. Or Ariel Dorfman, Death and the Maiden, So, yeah, there is only one thing that the prisoner rescues in this short story in which she has no rights. She's inside of the apartment with a fake key on the wall that doesn't open any doors, that is a provocation to see if she even attempts to free herself, with windows that are completely locked, when she only one desire is satisfied to have a plant, but the rest, she's confined, she's in prison. A prisoner deluxe, no? But when she makes love, or they have sex, probably, better expression, she feels that she's alive. So, those extreme situations in which sexuality is the only way to feel, and that, I think, is part of her own approach to the world. For that reason, I wanted to approach to this from the other side. Yeah, sexuality is an affirmation, is eros, no? Against thanatos. But at the same time, there is also this après-coup, no? After, that she feels no connection with the other, no? But going back to your example and the separation with the mother did other kind of literature, some kind of fantastic literature in the line of Borges and Silvina Ocampo and Bioy Casares. And she was a kind of a witch, and if you look at the photos of her mother, extremely attractive woman with different things, and earrings and scarf and no, and looking like coming from a magic world, but she never wrote about any political stances. That Venezuela, for that reason, I tried to frame my very focused and probably too focused presentation in a wider thing, no? So that is a way of discovering and keeping her own place, no? Her territory, let's say. Yeah, yeah.
I was just pondering about how you have Argentina as, I mean, the only way you can have Argentina as a motherland is in English. Because if I'm not mistaken, in Spanish it would be patria,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
patria, that's the father.
Oh, you are right. Well, that is a very interesting thing, yeah.
So somehow you are constrained by things that you have no control over,
Mm-hmm.
like the world. And if you are just focused on your intimacy, your separation from the mother, your this, your that, then you may miss some interesting little details of
That is
what happens
ironic,
around
no?
you.
That is ironic, the little small details.
I mean, when she's talking about the dirty war and all that,
sexuality,
she recognizes obviously those little details. Now, and another question is, you were talking about the black novel. What's black and where are the Argentines?
Okay.
You didn't, I didn't
No,
get
no,
an
no,
idea.
no. Okay. Let's start with the first one. As I said, I have been reading her, and I met her, and I interviewed her, and I was present when this book,
Right.
Los Deseos Oscuros y los Otros in Spanish, was presented in Buenos Aires with a stripper, and in a kind of garage, very marginal thing, very, underground, let's say, underground, deliberately underground. So, and I have taught her texts and repeatedly, and I have always personally some kind of ambivalence between the political discourse, so well structured, like a mask probably, and so coherent, and so convenient also, because she was in New York and she became a member of the human rights, and I don't know if you remember, one of the MLAs, MLA in our profession is a big stage, she was the keynote speaker, no? So she knows very well how to deal politically in all the levels of the world. But something, I felt ambivalent reading here. So I thought, and with some aftertaste of loneliness, no, in her reading. Of course, there is always self-projection, but let's say that my reading was some kind of well, it was a feeling, no? It was a feeling, a reader-response feeling. Something like, because on the other hand, a very good-looking woman when she was young, extremely attractive, and that in the several conferences that she was the keynote speaker, only surrounded by a lot of women going after her as a role model, and at the same time, if there was an attractive man in the room, she was going to catch him, no? And I have seen that with one that is Peter here, and there was a European economist in one of these conferences, etc. So she worked very well the game, many games, the political game, the sexual game, but at the same time I related in some aspect, and I saw loneliness and some, not shallow, but something that didn't make too much sense, no? And then when I read this book in Spanish many years ago, and I thought that this was something that was there very masked, and the political, because she was in Japan when I went this summer, and she was the keynote speaker for a conference on the memory in Latin America, and she gave a speech that I have here and read a couple of times before, where she was the, against Macri, actual president. So probably because of this ambivalence on my part and this some kind of discomfort, that I don't know if answered completely your question, but is the opposite that you probably perceive in the talk, that she overemphasized the political, always on the right side, no? Always talking on the right side, at the right place, with the right side in the right place, of course. Because she comes from a very bourgeois family, her father a medical doctor, her mother from an old family, a literary person. She grew up seeing Borges and her mother writing a book that it was not very good, but they laugh all the time, So, I mean, it's high middle class, no? But she adopted the cause, especially in the big. So that is some kind of response, Renata, from my perspective, of how she avoids or works around or manipulates. I mean, from my perspective. And the second one, Black Novel with Argentines, is a novel. I am more and more in agreement with one of the two famous quotations by Ricardo Piglia, and the first one I have used so much that probably you already know. Literary criticism is the modern form of autobiography. And the second one is that literary critics, we are like detectives. We are always in the text trying to detect traces in order to enter to the text, no? psychoanalysis has also compared with the detective tasks, so all things are together. So, black novel with Argentines that I didn't have time to comment, many of the characters, but mainly Duck, el pato in Spanish, is the person that is Agustin in the novel. Eh? And I have here, let's see if I can find it, a quotation that was a bit too long to read about the hands that I think is very interesting. The characters are Roberta, an Argentine writer, and Agustin, an Argentine writer that comes with a very important grant to New York to write a novel. Black novel because at the beginning, Agustin kills a woman that he met in a play. For that reason, it's black novel with Argentina. And after a while, the detective novel dilutes itself. No? It doesn't go too far, but it's the motivation for self-reflection and constant relationship what is going on in New York and what is going on in Argentina, military government then. So Agustin, they have a romantic relationship, and Agustin starts to feel impotent. Impotent, sexually impotent, and creatively important. So that is one of the lines of the text. But for that reason I said the diary is the real reference for me of the characters in some way. Where I read this, Agustin was holding her hand like a child, and Roberta was beginning to feel reconciled with the world, when a sudden memory made her let go of his hand with rage. It was not the thought of what he was capable of doing with that hand, because he killed a woman, but the reminder of what he was incapable of doing, giving it. It was as if she had been struck by the train the two of them were traveling on together some time back, when her head was hurting so badly, she reached for Agustin's hand for consolation. He kept it there barely half a second, then withdrew it with a muttered rejection. I don't like having my hand grasped. I feel trapped, he said. And Roberta had begun to cry inconsolably. Later, she tried to understand what it was all about. Listen, this is the opposite, the mirror of what I have read in Valenzuela and her mother. Roberta had begun to cry inconsolably. Later, she had tried to understand what it was all about, telling herself that he, having lost his mother at the age of 2, was barely acquainted with affectionate hands, only hands that seized him to drag him to places where he didn't want to go. That is almost exactly what is in the quote. Of course, Roberta's hand, that time on the train, was filled with other intents, with not the slightest intention of trapping him or leading him. But he had withdrawn his hand, and now he was clinging to hers in a reversal of roles. That is what all the novel is about, and most of them. Yeah. I don't know if I have more or less started to answer. Any other things that you would like to discuss? If we, I don't know, or we can go.